So I've got about 40 pages of notes here, so I'm ready for you guys. We're going to break this up into a few different sections. And what I just want to start, I'm going to just make a couple of comments because I want you guys to appreciate kind of the scale of what these two gentlemen have done. So the company was founded in 1975 by Greg when he was 19 years old. Greg's these guys' father. Dan joined in 2004, and that's about 20 years ago if you do the math. And that was 29 years after the firm was founded. And then Dave joined about 18 months later. And at the time, the company was in basement and foundation repair. And it was also a grip-tight dealer. And we'll talk a little bit more about grip-tight. It was doing about $4.5 million in revenues. So keep in mind, these guys show up, $4.5 million in revenues, been in business 29 years. Well, today, it's in multiple businesses. It's doing over $400 million in revenues, and it will celebrate its 50th anniversary next year. So just an incredible story to be told here of kind of building the company to this scale. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about what was happening in that first 29 years. And as a founder myself, and many of you in the room are founders, sometimes you look at these curves and you see the kind of, I think Dave's going to share this later, you see these curves and you go, what was that guy doing here? Nothing was happening. You know? For 29 years, he got up to $4.5 million in revenue. Well, he was doing some really important stuff. And that really was the foundation, no pun intended, of what they were able to build upon. And I think you guys are extremely respectful of both your dad and your mother, who were partners in this business. So let's talk a little bit about, so it was founded in 1975, and first 10 years, I guess, it was in basement waterproofing. And then this grip-type product had been invented. And my understanding is your dad and your uncle, I guess, were some of the early dealers of this. What was kind of learned as the business first moved from kind of basement waterproofing into this grip-type business? What was grip-type? What were you guys doing?
Mm-hmm. Never done it with two people. We haven't either.
Okay. We both know the answers.
Okay.
All right, you take it.
Yeah. So yeah, the very beginnings was really my dad thinking he was going to work for his dad at a grain elevator in a town of 300 or 400 people, about an hour northeast of here. And so when his dad sold that business without telling him, he was like, he had just graduated high school, trying to figure out what he wanted to do. It was actually his uncle who was already in basement waterproofing, got him into it. And then when this wall anchor was invented, they were the first two kind of contractors that they called and said, hey, we've kind of invented this thing. We don't know how to use it. Would you guys help us figure out how to use it? And so they both started doing that at that time. And so I think for our dad, it was like he had been kind of just trying to stay busy. And he was in basements. And when he saw these other problems, it was like, oh, it'd be nice to be able to solve those too. So I don't know that it was a super strategic, like, I need to go find another service to offer. It was more like, oh, you have something that I might be able to offer? Yeah, I'll try that. So it kind of happened that way.
And then he had an accident, right? It was 92, I believe. Yeah. And something that shifted the business pretty significantly. Could you take that, Dave?
Yeah. And you'll hear this in kind of some of our history presentations this morning, but our dad is a very hands-on. He started the business at 21 years old. My mom was 18. They'd got married, started the company, and he was good with his hands. Didn't really know how to build a business. He just knew how to solve problems, and he couldn't get out of his own way when it came to doing the jobs himself, just because he had this. It was out of care for the customers, but he just didn't think anybody else would do as good of a job, and his name was on it. And so he was insistent that he would do every job until he tore his ACL playing a pickup basketball game with his crew at the end of a day of work. And the type of work we do, especially in basement waterproofing, is we jackhammer basement floors out, and we haul 5-gallon buckets of concrete up and down the basement stairs to create a place that we can put drain pipes, and then we put the concrete back. So it's very labor intensive. A bad knee going up and down the stairs with 100 pounds of concrete up and down all day was impossible. And so I actually think they thought of it as we are screwed we're going to go out of business. And it was a huge blessing in disguise, because then he realized there are other people that can jackhammer concrete, believe it or not. And his crew was able to continue doing a good job. He could sort of supervise them from a distance, but it gave him the flexibility to run more sales appointments. He was doing the jobs by day, sales appointments essentially over the phone, trying to sell jobs that, so it was just it was not scalable. And you'll see in our growth chart, we stayed at like $50,000 to $75,000 in total revenue for the first decade we were in business, because that's how much he could generate by doing the work himself. So we probably went up by 5x just from him being able to run sales appointments over that following decade.
And then Larry shows up, right? A couple years later. Dan, talk a little bit about Larry's impact on the business.
Yeah, so after his injury, he started selling and growing the business just by having more capacity. And he actually was looking at additional products, trying to figure that out. And he was introduced to a guy named Larry Janeski, who has gone on to become a friend and someone that we've really learned a lot from. But as a contractor that was working on his business every day, he didn't really have the opportunity to like talk to anybody about like, how should I do this different? How should I do this better? He would say the only other people that were in this industry that I knew were my competitors, and they sure weren't going to teach me anything. So Larry had started basically a supply company for basement waterproofing products. He was very inventive. He had really innovated products. And he also was very innovative on like process and like how to actually run a business. And so he and my dad met in 1994, and Larry basically took my dad under his wing and started teaching him. It's kind of funny because Larry's like 10 years younger than my dad. But Larry's taking my dad under his wing and saying like, hey, when the phone rings and a customer says they want an appointment, just schedule it. Don't take a number, don't take a message and call them back later. That's like 2 transactions instead of 1. So it was simple things like that it was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So he brought new products, but he also brought a lot of just like, here's a better way to think about how to do your day-to-day business.
And that just gave the business a little more revenue, a little more capacity. So your dad's he's working his way through this, right? He's just kind of figuring this out himself and with friends and partners he's open to. And then I guess Griptite decides they really want your company to take more responsibility, right? And not just to be a dealer, but I think kind of become the master distributor, right? So you can talk a little bit about that transition?
Yeah, so we're a basement waterproofing company. We also fix basement walls that are pushing inward with these anchor systems that would kind of tie the basement walls back. And we're buying these products from Griptite. They were like a 20-person company, very small manufacturing business just outside of Des Moines. And they approached my dad and said, hey, would you mind going out and like being our sales rep, finding new contractors like you in other cities to sell these products to, and then we don't have anywhere to train. Like all of our employees are welders and fabricators. We need somewhere that they can learn how to do it if we want to scale this business. So in 1998, it was a huge opportunity that we would have never started Supportworks if that hadn't happened, and the company might not have even survived if it wasn't for the extra flow of income that we had as a distributor. So he started distributing for Griptite in 1998. We did that for 10 years, and we'll talk about it in my presentation after this, but it was that extra kind of source of income that allowed us to really survive winters. Like basement waterproofing companies don't do well when it doesn't rain because nobody gets it done proactively. So when your basement floods, you call us because you're freaked out, and the good news is you probably have to fix it because you might have like a bedroom down there or something, but if it's not, you're in deep trouble. And so like depending on the weather patterns, it was feast or famine for us, and this was the first time we didn't have to lay people off. We could keep good staff. They could invest in some marketing and take some more risks because they had this kind of distribution income coming from Griptite.
So this is all kind of happening before you guys show up, at least in a full-time capacity. And so I just want to highlight this part of the story because I think it's really interesting. Greg is just continuing to have he's open to ideas, he's open to new relationships, he's open to trying different things. And in doing this, they're actually setting some really important groundwork we're going to get into in just a minute. But now I want to step back a little bit with the two of you. So you were born in 79.
79.
And you were born in?
82.
And then your sister was born in?
85.
85. And so what was the most important value that you learned from your dad when you were little guys?
I think like it was a lot of the teaching wasn't sitting us down and telling us, it was showing us, right? So a lot of it was work ethic and taking care of people. And then I would say he just was kind of, he used to use the term whatever it takes. We still talk about that because when there was a problem, even if it was expensive, if it was a customer that was upset, he would just say, well, whatever it takes. We'd be like, hey, are you okay if we give this customer, it's not really our fault, but this is what it would take. It's going to be expensive or whatever. He'd be like, well, whatever it takes to make them happy. Just do what you got to do. And so we really, I think, learned a lot about customer service and hard work, and just doing the right thing. Yeah.
Anything you'd add to that?
I think the only thing I would add is I agree. So our dad is not super touchy-feely, not great at like having deep conversations. Like our mom did that, right? So what we were learning from him was through observation. He's super generous, would do anything to take care of people. So and I would say we both idolized him and the company as like little boys like that. Like we were very proud of this company. But the character building was probably more happening with mom putting us to bed and whatever else. Like she was definitely, he was always the face of the company and he was doing the jobs himself, but she was kind of the one pulling the strings, and she's the matriarch for sure, and was always kind of the behind the scenes one, maneuvering and keeping my dad grounded. And so I think we idolized him, but it was probably more because she did a good job of telling us that we should idolize him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like
a very
she
nice
wanted
wife.
us to look up to mom and dad, and so, but he was gone a lot. I mean, he was present, at baseball games and whatever, but he was working his ass off. And so it was really our mom that raised us, and we just kind of idolized that dad's working really hard.
So how about your
Well,
mom?
keep in mind that this is in our house through 1998.
Yeah, you're working out of the house.
So
right?
like the phone is
Equipment's in
ringing at the
garage.
house, the equipment's in the garage kind of thing. I was a senior in high school when they got their first office. So our whole life was in this business, right?
And so let's build on your mom just right. What's the most important value you've learned from your mom?
I think it's hard to pin one down, but I would say like her number one, she feels like our calling is to raise good kids. Like, God blessed us to be able to have children, and it's like our duty to do all the right things to make sure that they can become successful adults and continue through the generations. So I think an emphasis on our work is not our identity. Our identity is in the people we love and making sure we're good stewards of what we've been blessed with.
Yeah, I was going to use the word intentional, and I was going to use the word stewardship. I think that would be, she would want us to say, like, this is all a blessing that we are responsible to steward well. And that's been something that she's wanted to make sure that we all understood.
There was one other thing you guys shared with me a while, one of the two of you is, there was this kind of run towards the problem. Why don't you guys speak to that?
I think that our dad was very much do what you got to do, let's go fix it. And when there was issues, we ran toward him. I think my dad was a risk taker.
Yeah.
Like he just didn't really have a lot of fear. It was kind of like, I'll figure it out. He always said that, like, well, if so-and-so can do it, I can do it.
Right.
Like if there was someone in the world doing it, then I should be able to figure it out. And so he always just, when there was something, I remember he installed for Sears a lot when it was small, like for those first 10 or 15 years. Like some of you are probably too young to know what Sears is. It was a company at one time. It was a company that installed. They would sell things to you, and then they'd have somebody come install things at your house. But he would do those sorts of things, and I remember him saying, like, they would be like, "Hey, Greg, do you do like front doors, like front entry doors?" And he said, all I said was, "How much does it pay?" And they said $100 a door, and he said, "Yeah, I do front doors."
I do those.
So it was like, I need to pay the bills. You've got a problem. I'm going to go solve it, and I get $100 out of the deal. And he said, you just take the very first one apart very slowly, so that you can put the new one in.
Pay attention.
Right.
So you guys used to play a game, and this game ended up being a really important influence on you. It's called The Boss and Myron.
Dan likes to tell that story. I would never have brought that story up.
Could you just give us 30 seconds on what the game was?
I mean, when you're a kid, you want to be like your dad. At least that was the way we felt. And I think a lot of people, a lot of boys, I think, aspire to be their dad, right? So we played basement waterproofing a lot as kids. And Yeah, you know, we'd go get ready for work and go to work and pretend like we were doing work. And generally speaking, one of us had to be Greg, the boss, and one of us had to be Myron, which is my dad's first full-time employee. And Dave still resents the fact that he always had to be Myron.
Remember this. Remember this story.
We almost got him to name his first boy Myron.
Yeah, my wife did not go for
His
it,
wife
but
would not
I
go
thought it
for
would
it.
be cool.
So how'd you earn your first buck?
Yeah, when I was 14, I was called upon because middle of the summer, I don't remember what caused it, if somebody quit, what happened, but my dad just basically came home and was like, you need to go to work today. We need a guy. And we had to drill a bunch of holes in concrete to lift and level some concrete. And we were so cheap at that point, when the drill bits got worn out, you just got a guy to stand there with the drill for a long time, and because it was cheaper to pay me $5 an hour than it was to get a new drill bit. And so, I was 14 when I got called into my first job, and then the following summer, we actually started working together on a crew, and or maybe it was 2 years later or something like that. And
Is that with Jesse?
And so then it was us and Jesse.
Yeah, I think roughly when you were 16, you started being able to drive to work, and then I'm at home for the summer with nobody to play with, and so I would have been, 13 or whatever, and just was like, can you drive me into the office? And so he would drive me in when I was 13, and I would just like sweep the shop all day while he was on a job site, and then he'd come back and take me home, because I'd rather work than be at home by myself or whatever.
But you did something even earlier than that. When you were 11, you bought something.
Was that
Candy machine?
Where did you hear about that? I don't remember telling you about that. Yeah,
Weird
it
how
was,
this stuff comes
in
up.
my junior high school, the PE teacher had a side hustle of one of those candy machines. Like we have one out there that's got like the 3 different candies, and you put a quarter in there. And he was going to get a new one, and so I asked him how much he wanted for it, and I bought his candy machine, and then I put it in at our office, which at that time was like a kind of a more dingy little warehouse where there was no like cafe, right? So the candy machine was quite successful. And I would go to Sam's Club and fill it up, and then come back and get the quarters. And so I ran that candy machine for like 4 or 5 years, probably through high school, and made a few $100 at a time.
You had it dialed in, so for a quarter you got like 2 M&Ms.
You got to find the market demand.
These are important
It wasn't
lessons to learn at
adjustable.
11. And then how did you buy the candy machine?
So I don't recall for sure, but I don't actually remember. But I think that maybe you're hearing a story. So my parents were always, I think, kind of proud that I was entrepreneurial to do that. And so then we were in this building, I think, right when we moved in. And so they talked to our oldest, are both seniors in high school, but 7, 8 years ago when they were 9 or 10 years old, when we moved into this building, my parents were like, hey, why don't we get a candy machine to put in the office, and we'll buy it for you, and we'll give you a promissory note. And so they loaned they did a contract with the promissory note. The kids had to sign it, and they loaned them $300 or whatever they needed for the machine and for like their first batch of inventory. And then they learned to kind of pay off that loan and how that worked. And then they got sick of it after like 3 years, and then they sold it to the next round of kids. So like our son and daughter that are freshmen in high school now, and they made a loan to each other. So just trying to kind of like teach them to think about money and business at a very early age.
I also think though that now it's like the 3rd set of kids, and I'm pretty sure now my mom just runs the candy machine. They might get the money. I
This
don't
candy
know.
machine in
The
the
third
loans is very
born
important.
never has any grit whatsoever. It's just the first 2.
So you guys worked really young. You learned a little bit about borrowing money, buying assets, generating cash flow. I mean, it's pretty interesting stuff for young boys, right? It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch to you, Dan, for just a minute. Now we're in 2004. And we could talk for hours, so I'm really trying to pare this down. So I apologize if I'm jumping around a little bit. It's 2004. The company's doing about $4.5 million. In 2014, the company's doing $40 million. What changed? You joined. You joined not taking anything away from your parents, but you came in. Talk a little bit about when you came in, what you did, what were some of these improvements you started doing?
Yeah, I mean, I was in my 20s, I mean, mid-20s, and I was a lot of energy. I didn't have anything else going on. I just was all about my work, and I didn't have kids yet, and I jumped in. It was kind of like we need help with whatever. There wasn't like a real definition in my role, but I would kind of do sales when it was busy. I would help recruit dealers when it wasn't as busy, and kind of do wore those two hats. And so after about a year, I was really working on how to sell well, rather than just, here's some appointments, go see what you can do, which has kind of been the philosophy up until that point. We had no managers. There's 35 employees at the time, no managers. It was Greg owned it, and Jim was like his right-hand man, but everybody kind of reported to both of them, including me. And so I just started saying, like, if I'm going to sell, I want to figure out how to do it well. And so I would go to conferences and go and watch other contractors, and I started implementing sort of like selling with a very specific kind of intention, and started getting pretty good results. And I wouldn't even say that I loved being in sales as much as I loved winning. And so it was about figuring out how to win, right? And so after a little while, they asked me if I wanted to be the first sales manager. We'd never had one. We had 3-4 salespeople. And so I was like, okay, sure. And so started working with them to try and implement, like, okay, this is what's working for me. Let me help you implement the same things. And then over time, I would convince, like, we should hire one more salesperson. Let me help in marketing so we can get more appointments, and then I can hire another salesperson. And it was like not resisted, but not welcomed either. It was kind of like it would take a month of debate between me and my dad, usually, before he'd be like, all right, yeah, try it. And so I would say over the next couple of years, it was a lot of me trying to convince him to try things. And it wasn't that he was opposed to it. It was more that he was conservative and didn't want to screw it up. And in hindsight, he was like, you're 25 years old. It might be a good idea, but like, we need to think about this a little bit. You're going to screw some of these up. I just don't want too many mess ups in the same year, you know? And so it really became, over time, sort of just I would work in different departments and try and implement different things. And I'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow when I start talking about customer journey. But really then over time, as I kind of worked on a department, I would then hire someone to manage that department as I kind of moved to the next department. Nick Roy's in the back here. He was walking around yesterday helping us. He was one of those people, and now he's the president at Thrasher, and really was one of the instrumental people. And like, there's been others as well that we all just really work together. And at the same time, we were working closely with Dave and Amanda on kind of like, how do they implement this with dealers, or what are they learning from dealers that we could implement here? And so it was a lot of back and forth and brainstorming and just trying things.
And I think I think it's remarkable. You go from 4.5 over a 10-year period to 40, and you're just doing it on instincts and talking to other people and going out in the industry and seeing other people. You just bring those lessons back in.
And there's something to be said for just picking a big goal.
But I think a lot of it was not necessarily, we weren't necessarily inventing these ideas. We were learning them mainly from Larry Janeski, the supplier of our waterproofing products. We'd go to their events, and they'd roll out some new concept about, hey, instead of using a 3-ring binder, when we call it a pitch book, to go through and like pitch the customer using like old brochures and drawings, what if we used a computer and we played videos so they could understand how the products work and that kind of stuff? And so that was a good idea, but at the time that was like way out of the box. Like contractors, that would have been crazy. We don't even know how to use computers as a contractor in this stage of life. And my dad, and by the way, this is my 19th year in October, and I officially appreciate what it means to be a little bit tired. I think my dad sometimes, like, we gave him shit because he wouldn't want to like implement new ideas, and we were 25 and like all pumped up. But I think he was like, I tried implementing ideas for 35 years. I'm freaking tired. I don't want to do that right now. And sometimes I'm like, I get it now. but I think what Dan was good at, that like a lot of, and maybe this will be something you guys can relate to, but a lot of the contractors that we work with still even today, but especially back then, have an internal thought, and sometimes they'll even vocalize it, that it's just like, oh yeah, that'll never work here. That'll never work at my office. So you roll out a great concept, you're like, yeah, that's good for you guys that it works there. But here. Or they like, so my dad would sit in the back of the room. He was like very popular. Everybody liked him. He had tons of friends that were these other business owners in the same industry. And by the way, foundation repair contractors drink a shit ton of beer. We just pound beer, yeah. It's mostly tasteless beer though, not stuff you make. The lighter the better. But he would just be like, they were itching to go out to the bar and like hang out after the conference, and they would just kind of laugh at these ideas, like, computer at the kitchen table, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I think what Dan was good at and is way better at than me, you wanted to win, but you like implementing process and you like solving problems. And they would have a solution, and it was just a matter of, I'm just gonna implement these good ideas that somebody else is coming up with. Whereas like we would have just gone to those events, when my dad would have gone to those events and just maybe gleaned a couple ideas, but mainly just gone and partied with his buddies for a 3-day conference and then come home. And Dan was in the front row, taking notes, and then actually coming back and like within a week, like, this is exactly what they told me to do, I'm gonna implement it. So I think that's like Dan's hidden genius really, is just taking good ideas, and he comes up with his own good ideas every once in a while. But is mainly like just being willing to implement.
And Nick implements them.
Yeah. Good job, Nick. Okay, so let's switch gears. So now it's March of 2008, and I'm gonna use the same time frame, 2008 to 2014, so it matches up with the 4.5 to 40. Supportworks is 0 revenue in 2008, 75 million in revenue in 2014, and that's pretty incredible. And so tell us a little bit about your coming back into the firm, what you were initially doing, how that kind of lent itself to this idea of Supportworks, a little bit about that first year.
Yeah, so when I came back, 18 months after Dan, and at that point he pretty much went full-time into Thrasher management, mainly in sales at that time, but was kind of starting to work in other areas. And so then I was full-time on this grip-tight distribution business, cold calling foundation repair contractors or basement waterproofing contractors to see if I could fly out and compel them to buy these products. And I did that for roughly, I'm trying to think if it was maybe 3 years or something like that before and I'll talk about more detail about that story here in my next presentation, but we left this grip-tight company that was basically, there's probably 8 companies that sold the exact same stuff in our industry. None of it was all that terribly, there's very little patents. Still to this day, like people ask us, oh my gosh, you must have a ton of patents. It's like, no, we just take other people's ideas and we try to implement them better. So we're not manufacturing anything that we like invented that's new technology. But so we're working for this company. All of our competitors are exactly the same, selling the exact same stuff for a very similar price. And the service isn't great. And we're trying to sell. And so we're a basement systems dealer. So there's waterproofing supply companies doing all these super kind of cutting edge, implementing training and development stuff. And we're enjoying that as a Thrasher company. And then we're selling for grip-tight, and we feel like we stink in comparison to what they're doing. And so we're just like, hey, we should do sales software for our foundation repair side and sell those products using videos instead of brochures. And the ownership of that was just not interested in evolving. And so after 3 years of this, they had changed owners, and the new owners did not want to change anything. We left grip-tight and we started Supportworks really with this idea of we don't do anything unique as far as the products we sell, but we're going to sell you products you need anyway for the same price you could buy them from somebody else. But on a handshake, if you buy all your stuff from us, we won't sell to anybody else in your town. And we're going to give you all this training and development. We're going to give you these sales tools. We're going to give you marketing support. And we'll do that for free in exchange for your loyalty to buying product. And that was copied off of somebody else. Larry Janeski was the guy that had done that in the waterproofing industry already. But nobody had done it in foundation repair. And we went from zero, and we already had relationships in the industry because of grip-tight and basement systems and all that kind of stuff. So we knew all the people in the industry, and so it was very easy for us to call and get people compelled to say like, oh my gosh, if you'll sell me that stuff for the same price as grip-tight or somebody else, but you'll help me do some of the stuff that basement systems is doing, oh my gosh, it's a no-brainer.
And in this, my understanding is your parents took quite a bit of risk, right? Mm-hmm. Because you didn't really know what was going to happen. They put up, I believe, almost all of their life savings. Mm-hmm. To say, I'm betting on my boys, and you guys did $9 million in revenue the first year. Is that about right?
Yeah. So 2008, we didn't start selling. We had to start manufacturing products. So for 6 months, we had no revenue. We did $3 million in that first year, but then our first full calendar year, we did $9 million. Yeah. And I think that year we broke even, and by the second year in business, we were in the black. So it was it became successful quickly, but up to that point, the business wasn't successful enough for them to put any chips in their pocket. And so I think they had, and we had a 50-50 partner, that Larry Janeski was our partner.
Yep.
He put in $1 million and he had lots of millions, so it was like a nice, easy investment for him. My parents took every penny that they had of that $1 million. So we had $2 million of starting cash, and we just used that to essentially pay us before we had revenue and place POs for product.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really cool that your parents were willing to take that level of risk. And my understanding too is that your dad's instinct was just to go to another manufacturer. But it was at a conference, I guess your dad and Larry were driving in a car and your dad was kind of explaining, we'll just go find somebody to replace Grip-Tite. And Larry's the one that said, why do that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We were thinking we would just try to call other companies that were like Grip-Tite and see if they'd want us to do it. And there were people that would have wanted us to do that. But we were at a basement systems convention where this is these trainings that Dan would go to and kind of learn and whatnot. And Larry and my dad there's a lot of just like, you just kind of chalk it up to serendipity or God's timing or whatever else. But they end up in a car, just the two of them driving to a meeting. And Larry's probably being intentional because there was rumors that there was trouble in paradise with us in this Grip-Tite ownership. And I think he was like, I'm going to talk to Greg about that. But so they get in a car ride from one building to another during this convention, and Larry's like, hey, I heard there's kind of some trouble, what are you thinking? And my dad's like, yeah, we just can't get along with these new owners, they don't, it's just not working. And so we're trying to figure out what we're going to do, maybe find somebody else to partner with. And Larry's like, why would you do that? Like, why don't we start something? And Larry's like, I've always wanted to be in the foundation repair business, but you're a good customer for me and we have a good thing going, so I never wanted to compete with you. But why don't, I have some capital, I have marketing know-how, I have training and development resources, but you have the industry trade knowledge. Why don't you guys start it in Omaha? And you'll bring all the kind of tribal knowledge of the industry, and I'll bring marketing savvy, and we'll have a great business. And so we owe a lot to him, believing in us and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And eventually you bought him out, so it became all part of the family. So,
Yep.
but a wonderful relationship, it sounds like, with Larry for you guys. So let's talk about, it's kind of 2016, 2017. Some guy starts buying companies, buying potential customers. And then you find out the guy actually has a very large private equity firm sitting behind him. And this is the beginning of private equity entering the industry. And how did that make you feel? And kind of what was your thought process when you started seeing this dynamic develop?
Well, I used to have as much hair as Dan. In 2017, I had a full head of hair. And it all fell out in like 4 years. But yeah, so we, up to that point in 2016, we bought out Larry Janeski, so we became 100% owner. That same year, one of our largest customers sold to this guy who was private equity, and we had no idea what that meant. And I don't know that we would have had the guts to buy Supportworks had we not. Had we known what the frickin' storm that was coming, we would have probably been too scared. It obviously was, I'm so glad it worked out the way it did, but this guy sells, we're like, oh, good for you. You kind of hated your life anyway. The owner of that business was grumpy.
We sold it to private equity. We sold it to Matt.
And it was like, we sold it to this great guy. He's super smart. You guys are gonna love him, And so we're like, oh, that's great. Have a nice life. Glad you were able to sell the company. So they're still a customer of ours. And then exactly a year later, they were basically a customer for about a year. They just went on they were doing all sorts of backroom conversations with our customers, and they had this intention of basically buying all of our customers and then forcing us to sell because they'd own all of our supply, they'd be 100% of our customers. So they bought out, over the next 3 years after that, bought out, I don't know, I have no idea how many actually, probably 30 customers to the tune of $70 million worth of revenue, or $50 million worth of lost revenue for us, which is a lot. And we're obviously trying to backfill that revenue as they would pick somebody off. We'd try to find a replacement, but it was like we had already invested so much time into growing these customers. But and I'll talk about this in my next presentation, but the PE sales pitch, when our dealer network all knows each other, like we're all friends, all the business owners have each other's cell numbers and they all talk a lot. And it was this, you better sell that. We're the deep-pocketed private equity people. I know you've never heard of us, but we dominate the world, and you'll either you should sell to us and you're going to get rich, and if you don't, we're going to crush you. And so everybody was freaking out, and I'm getting calls daily of people going, hey, I'm really worried about you guys. You should probably sell before it's too late, kind of thing. And so that's when all my hair fell out. And those first couple of years, they're kind of getting picked off, and I'm the Supportworks guy, Dan's the Thrasher guy. It's not really affecting Thrasher that much, really at all, because we're in
all of our growth here because we had customers in all the cities around us that we would never have gone and competed with. And so it was kind of this weird dynamic where we were kind of feeling like we were hitting a ceiling a little bit on how much we could grow in Omaha. But we also had a good business going, selling to these people. And so then we would talk to them about whether we should partner with them, and it got really kind of weird. And Dave was living in the pain of it all more so than I was.
Getting calls from customers telling me that like we're going to be screwed and that these PE guys are going to run off with the industry. And I would go to the family board, which was like basically just me, my brother, and my mom. And our uncle was there usually. But I would just be like, hey, we got to do so. We either got to sell or we got to start buying or whatever. And they were like, calm down. And I think the truth was probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
I should have
probably
calmed down,
overestimated it, and
but
I probably underestimated.
they totally blew off that it was a threat. I was freaked out probably too much, and they were like, just settle down. We're going to be fine. I probably would have sold the darn thing. I didn't. I thought we were screwed. But that back and forth, then it was that there was enough. We started calling customers and trying to get right of first refusal agreements to say like, hey, before you sell, we're going to give you a discount if you at least give us a chance to buy you before you sell to our competitor. So we got like, I don't know, 10 or 15 customers to do that, never really thinking that they would actually take us up on it. And so then a couple of them were like, hey, I got an offer from these guys for $5 million. You want this right of first refusal? And we're like, oh shit, $5 million? I thought this was just going to keep you from selling. I just want to sell you the product. But so we were kind of like at this tipping point of, do we take a big chance and go take on some debt and start buying these companies, or do we just keep letting them get picked off and figure out where we go from there? And it was right in that was in late 2018. We were going to do a conference in this room in a similar setup to this with all the owners to try to talk to them about private equity and whatever. I got referred to Bo Burlingham. He had written Finish Big. And so I was like, hey, could you speak to about like the pros and cons of selling and what successful exits versus unsuccessful exits look like? And he's like, yeah, I'll come speak. And he did. But he was like, you should really meet this Dave Whorton guy. And so it was 2019 was my first summit. So 17 was when the private equity guys entered our industry. Within 2 years, we found this. And this organization had a big impact on us just staying the course and saying, we might even have a competitive advantage here. But I think we wouldn't have had the courage to do that if it wasn't for other folks like the people in this room dealing with the same stuff and being committed to the same values.
And those first, I think the first one or two acquisitions really was brought just into Thrasher. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the very first one would have been in 2017. A friend of my dad's who was a dealer in Kansas had actually had two businesses, one in Indiana, one in Kansas. And he had sold the one in Indiana to the guy that eventually sold. And he felt kind of wronged by that because he felt like he was given a promise that like it was going to be kept the same. He also was given a promise that they wouldn't pay off the seller financing early because he wanted to, from a tax standpoint, he didn't want that to happen. Well, then when they sold, they paid him off early. He didn't get it in the contract. So he felt wronged by them. So he was like, I'm not selling to them. He calls us. It was actually kind of funny because we'd never bought anything. We bought a truck, right? That was like the biggest purchase we'd ever made. And so this guy, Danny, comes to Omaha from Wichita, Kansas. He's ready to retire. He's older, having some health issues. We've not seen any financials. We have not seen a tax return. We have seen nothing. He sits down in my dad's office. My dad was still sort of working then, but like also semi-retired. He sits down, Dave and I sit down, this Danny guy sits down, and my dad says like, so I know you're interested in selling. What were you thinking? And he was like, well, we do about $4 million a year in revenue, and I'd like to get $2 million for it. And my dad goes, sounds good, sold.
We bought a sight unseen. We had no idea if that was a good deal or not.
Best investment we ever made.
And
Love Greg's instincts.
I think we netted $2 million in that location by year 3.
I mean,
Like-
we did, by the way, we
grew
did
it from $4 million
overpay.
to $25 million in like 4 years.
In terms of like, if you just look at it, it was basically a break-even company that
With
had
old junky
with
fleet,
old junk
yeah.
trucks, with some nice people, but that was about the most complimentary thing you could say. But the market was great, and it just needed someone to put some attention into it. And with it, we grew it from $4 million. By the way, I don't even think they did $4 million in revenue. I think it was less than that. But we'll be pushing close to $30 million this year in Wichita, and we hit 15 in like the third or fourth year there. So it really took off pretty quickly.
And this now becomes a whole new dimension of growth for you guys.
It was a different level of confidence. I think
It was also a lot of work.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it was a ton of work, but it was kind of fun work because you're seeing there's so much low-hanging fruit to make the business better.
Well,
We're
and
able
you're
to see
an
like real
offense now,
strides.
too. You guys are on
Well, I was going to
offense.
say, I think that the confidence to say like we can do this again.
Yeah.
And I think part of that was I think some of the resistance was fear of the unknown and that kind of stuff, and I think we both had some of that. But our dad had retired. He was in that Danny Marr meeting, but he was even retired before that. They just were old fishing
Depends how you
buddies
define
or whatever.
retired.
But so at that point, he wasn't coming to like the family board meetings anymore. My mom had stepped in for that, and she does not care about business. She doesn't care about money, and her only priority is that we don't screw up her grandkids. And so the idea, and she grew up in a business that they did everything themselves. They did everything themselves. And so she had no even sense of how do you buy a company in Wichita, Kansas and run it successfully without Dan and Dave being there every other week. Like we'd have to be rotating down there. And she was like, then you're gonna be crappy dads,
Right.
You're gonna screw up my grandkids, and so I don't wanna do it. And so she has no entrepreneurialism at all. Our dad has that, but she has like all the emotional intelligence and stuff. So they're a great yin and yang for each other, but she was not interested in doing that. The only reason we got it was partially because like we struck a deal over a handshake before she even knew about it. But I think that because it was so close in a neighboring state, it was like, fine, we'll try that one. But I think then like a year or two into that, we had doubled it in size, and Dan and I weren't going down there very much. And I think she realized like, oh, you can scale a business without Dan and Dave having to be at every single place every single day. And so then we were like, okay, we have a little more boldness to try the next one and the next one.
That's awesome.
And I don't know if we would have said we thought it was going well if she would have for sure believed us, but she trusted our tax accountant because they had used the same tax accountant for a lot of years. And he kept saying like, this really worked out well. And she'd be like, really? And he'd be like, I mean, you got your write-off. It was an asset purchase. You wrote all this equipment off the first year, and you grew the business. He was just like, this is a great investment. And then so I think she was kind of like, huh.
And the grandkids are okay.
Saying that.
I guess maybe it's going okay. So then it was just kind of like it started an avalanche of
Right.
of
And we'll
deal-making.
talk more about that, I think, is it later today, right?
Yeah,
M&A
just right
and-
after this, I'll talk
and
about some of that.
Partners and the whole thing. So we won't get into the details of that. Let's save it for that. So let's, I just want to kind of share a little bit of the kind of these key moments in the development of the business, but like now different vector. You guys we talked about this, so you're a little prepped for it. But so the company, 4.5 million as you entered the business, Dan, over 400 million now, or close to 400 million. What were some of the most important lessons in scaling the business from that size? I mean, if you're talking to one of our friends who's running a $25 million business or $50 million business, $100 million business, just what would be of value to them as they think about kind of getting to the scale you're at? And then we'll talk, save this for later, but I want to talk about the future too, just the scale you're thinking about going forward. But what are the lessons through today, the most important ones you think other entrepreneurs would benefit from hearing?
You want to go first?
Sure. I think number one is identifying why you do what you do and making sure that you bring other people around you that already have that same sort of why. So value alignment amongst especially key leaders, but really around everyone is what makes it creates less friction, right? So if you're all excited about where you're going, it's a lot easier to overcome the tough times. It's a lot easier to get through the ups and downs. So finding other people that have value alignment and that care about the same things, I think, is really important.
We talked about this. It was also a discovery process for you.
Yeah.
Right? It actually shifted your leadership style. It shifted your management style. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I was just experiences I had in my youth, I think I really had kind of a fear of rejection, wanting to prove myself. And I think that drove me to try really hard to grow a business so that I could say I did it. And that probably did motivate me in some ways, and it probably did get some things done. But it also started doing some damage to relationships, and it wasn't very fulfilling for me. I would set a really big goal, one that everybody thought was crazy, but then I would go find a way to hit it and rally people around me to hit it. But then like we'd celebrate it for a day, and the next day be like, well, okay, now what? I guess we got to pick another big goal and go run at it again. And at one point, Nick actually was nice enough to write me a 3-page letter letting me know that I was not a very healthy person to be around emotionally. And that caused me to do some work, and I was able to really shift kind of the why I do this over a period of time, thinking about that and kind of actually thinking about what was driving that and how do I maybe do some forgiveness work, and able to kind of shift into more of like I'm doing this for the people. I'm doing this to bring glory to God, not to prove myself to anybody. Yeah. And I think that shifted my leadership style, but it also made it a lot more fun.
That's awesome.
It took less energy to come to work every day once I was able to kind of identify like why are we doing this? Like what's it for? And then we've defined some of that as a business too,
right,
which has made it easier in the interview process and in the recruiting process to make sure that we're bringing the right people in and getting the right people around us. And it also has made us really want to invest in growing leaders, because I think there is a tendency when we hit that point in business where we're struggling, like where we're like, man, it's getting bigger than I can handle. I think most of us probably have a tendency to think, I'm going to go find some genius out there that I can hire that's going to come in here and be a silver bullet that's going to help me fix this. And most of us have probably also experienced the disaster that can be when they aren't a fit. And so I think we've really realized that like the more we can grow people from within that have that value alignment, get to know who we are, understand our business, that care about the same things we do, that can be really good. Now you have to supplement that with people from the outside that bring expertise that maybe you don't have. But it's not because they're going to come in and be the solution. They're just a part of the solution. So we've invested a lot in growing people internally as well.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to build on that, I think when with an acquisition, you see it definitely almost right away, but even just with our own company as it organically was growing, either figuring out, and I think this is something that Dan did well, partially maybe in his unhealthy phase that was helping the business around, these are results that we're going to get. And I remember like hearing you talk about the story in a sales meeting of like, this is what our sales metric is today. This is where we're going, and everything in between here is change. And you're either going to have to change and get here, or you can get out, basically. And he probably said it exactly like that, actually. That would have been old Dan.
I probably said GTFO.
Yeah,
I probably didn't actually say.
So, but he was just like that. Like he was hell bent on that, and not afraid to say, "I would love it if you could come with me, but if you can't, I'll find somebody who will." And we probably did that in certain ways wrong, where we like bulldozed some people that wasn't the best, wasn't as people first as it should have been. And maybe we could have saved some people if we would have done it differently. But we also had some people who were not value aligned, that didn't fit the culture, that weren't ready to get on board with like being a better company. And so being willing to like say, you got me, what got you here won't get you there kind of thing. And kind of a willingness to like, we're going to try to walk alongside and help you get there, but this is where we're going. And so we'd love for you to come along, but like staying the same and staying where we are is not an option.
I think coupled with that, and I think it was really interesting we had this conversation. Both of you brought up this question of why. Why are we really doing this? And is it just about our ego or about trying to have a bigger impact in the world? And clearly you made that shift. But very tightly coupled is both of you said, and I talked to these guys independently just to kind of, you got to never stop learning. Just insatiable learning and reading, but you weren't a great student. You're pretty honest about that. And Dan, I think you were a good, maybe not an exceptional student.
He followed the rules.
Yeah,
but I didn't want to get in trouble.
But you guys, I think that's a very important part of learning how to scale the business is you guys just absorbed tremendous amounts of information through relationships, through books. I mean, want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can start. I was the bad student. I barely got through high school. And I did try a little harder in college just because I was able to pick the classes I wanted to take, I think made a difference. But I think most of us that went to college would agree that like we don't use very much of that knowledge that we picked up in our daily lives anymore. It's more what we learn on the job is by far more valuable. And so I got through college and I doubt that I really came in with much knowledge, but in the company, I was 25 years old. I was working either as a colleague or possibly as a manager of people who were in their 40s or, definitely older than me. And I was super insecure about being perceived as the owner's kid that was too young, that was now running things. And so I was like hell-bent on, being the most knowledgeable one in the room when it came to, I've read like every Jim Collins book from cover to cover multiple times, every Pat Lencioni book, a lot of the same books that I'm sure you guys have all read, but I was inhaling that stuff. And I know you were as well, but I think the thing that I think we did really well that a lot of people who read a book don't do is like we would finish the book and then we would implement whatever it said. And like we'd make our leadership team like talk about, okay, so how are we going to start doing this exercise that Patrick Lencioni says about how to get team health? Like let's sit around in a circle and let's talk to each other about how we hurt each other, and let's have some uncomfortable conversations. And we would really implement what we were reading in these books. And I think my college degree is in about 20 business books that transformed the way I think by far. And it was mostly in that first 10 years of my career, first 5 or 10 years. We were reading a book every other month probably.
Mm-hmm. And it helped having people on the team that were also similarly like, hey, let's learn this, let's figure it out. And Nick and Amanda would be good examples of that. And we would just be open about, well, how are we doing in this area? We just read that, a 10X company would think this way. Are we thinking like a 10X company or are we thinking like this? And we would have those conversations and then be like, all right, let's do this then. I mean, we just kept
or like a smack recipe or a BHAG or these different things that are in Jim Collins books for those that are familiar. We would just be like, apparently the good companies have smack recipes, so let's write one and let's spend the next 2 meetings figuring out what our our BHAG or our smack recipe, or you name it, like every book that had anything, we would try it.
Yeah, purpose, mission, values. We need to have those. All right, let's go wrestle with those concepts and figure out what they are for us.
So it wasn't just individual learning, you were actually doing that with the team. And it was actually part of the process of just continuing to adapt and learn, again, in this kind of scaling. Now, another thing you guys brought up, which I think I've heard from a number of members, is this kind of risk of loyal employees hitting their ceiling. And kind of how to deal with that. Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, yes. So there are people that can grow with the company, and then there are people that are going to grow to a point, and then they kind of are where they want to be, and they don't really want to do more. And I think figuring out how to handle that has been a learning curve, and I think we've gotten a lot better at it. But like the concept of right person, right seat is a big part of that. And I think understanding that a right person is someone that is value aligned, that believes in our purpose, that like is kind of naturally a fit. But then right seat is really like, this is what the requirements of the job are. And so when we are able to talk to people about like, you're a right person, you're clearly a right person, you've been doing these things that are great. As far as your seat goes, we need you to increase your capacity in this area because the company now needs it. Or, you are an essential role in the company, but like we're reaching a point where we're going to need you to either level up or we're going to need you to be okay with a different role. And so being able to have those conversations, and so we can be loyal to the employee and be loyal to the organization at the same time. And finding that living in that tension is important. And so we've had, and there's a book called Predictable Success that was really helpful for us at one time. Les McCune is the author, and he talks about the rise of the big dogs. And he's talking about when you're scaling, the people, usually salespeople, but it can be a lot of different roles, that tend to be the ones that help you grow really fast when there are no rules. Yeah. When you're scaling, you say yes to everything, right? That customer needs us to do a custom thing. Yeah, we can do that. Well, then you reach a point where that isn't scalable anymore, and you have to start saying no. And the big dogs, as he terms them, are the ones that get really upset when you say no. And how to deal with those people is something that he talks about, and I think we had to learn how to do that. Like, okay, you're a really good salesperson, but we don't sell that anymore, and you keep selling it. Right. And that's not going to work for us. And that's even where it comes to the idea of saying, like, here's where we're going, and here's why we can't do that anymore. and we really want you to be a part of our success in the future, and we really appreciate you for what you've done up to this point. But we're not going back. We're not going back to the way it was. We're going to a new future.
And let's say you're roughly 100 million. How did you know what you needed for the next 100 million, 150? Because it sounds like you guys have
You don't, let's be honest.
Okay.
You don't actually know. You
Unless
just
you
know
went
that
to
what they're
Stanford
doing right now isn't enough.
business
Okay,
school or
so you just sense it. It's like there's something, it's a little too sticky there, or it's not changing enough, or
Yeah, or like it's a lot of times it's like when you see chaos in like a department, for example.
just chaos.
It's just things are falling through the cracks.
Okay.
The team isn't growing at the same rate as the rest of the organization in terms of just like the way we're handling things. It's like, okay, what's going on over there? And it's almost always a leadership issue.
How do you diagnose that? Do you go and just talk to the team, start figuring out what's going on? Because it sounds like you want to give the individual opportunity to improve, but at the same time, you got to figure out whether they've hit their ceiling.
You're talking about the struggling employees. How do we figure out like when they maybe they've hit a ceiling?
How are you figuring out that there is a leadership issue around somebody hitting the ceiling?
I mean, I think some of it is really obvious. For example, like there's somebody I think that we're both thinking of in our mind, Tom Bilyeu, who's a long 30-year employee that's been with us forever. We would never not. He's going to have to quit from here before he doesn't work here anymore, unless he like did something super unethical or something. But he definitely hit a ceiling, and you could read it in the sales numbers. Like you are our worst sales guy, and we can't keep burning appointments on you anymore. But you're a great guy, and we know you can take care of customers. So how about we're going to have you go talk to the real estate agents. We're going to have you take care of friends and family, that we're going to give a special deal, that you don't need a special thing, whatever. So we found a place for him. And so sometimes we'll do that, and then other times you find somebody you're like, you can't keep being one of the lowest performers, but we think you can do more, and we're going to put you on a growth plan and whatever. The other thing I think that happens that's maybe less measurable is just colleagues, coworkers are complaining that they're not getting responses to emails, or customers are calling and giving an indication that something didn't go well when you were there. So I mean, the customers and the coworkers and all that kind of stuff, I think, smokes out when something isn't right.
I think really strong team health is a big part of this. So like at a leadership team level, like 5 dysfunctions of a team teaches this really well, and it has some activities that you can use as well. But this idea that like our biggest competitive advantage is team health. And so if we are honest with each other, if we actually can say like, here's the issue we're having, and as a team, we can say like, yeah, no, like that's an issue, that's happening in your department, let's all talk about how we can fix it. And at some point, that person either is able to start solving those problems, or they aren't, and they kind of get exposed. But in a nice way, because it's not like you're being mean to that person. They're self-diagnosing that it's a problem, and so then those conversations naturally turn into like, okay, what do I need to do to either be able to solve these problems, or is this not the right fit for me? Or it naturally turns into those.
Yes, your attentiveness to this is incredibly important, because you care about team health, you care about people first. If you start seeing that, then you guys go in and get underneath it.
And you can either do something about it, or you can wait for them to crash and burn. Either way, it's hard.
That sounds
right.
hard.
So. Which hard do we want?
Let's talk a little bit about Myron, and how'd that all work out?
I think he's a concrete guy still.
No,
yeah,
I mean, you two guys.
He might be in rehab.
Oh,
The boss.
Still Myron, no.
You resolved it, right?
Well, yeah, and I think some of it was through intentionality. I can think of some examples where that was intentionality, and some of it was good luck in the fact that when Dan came into the business, he's running sales appointments, he's doing some group type dealer recruiting, whatever. He kind of morphs into the Thrasher sales manager job, which opens, so my parents called and were like, hey, do you want to come work for us? And I took this grip type job. Well, we both owe it, and so since that day, and then when we started Supportworks, I ran that and Dan ran Thrasher. We've always had 2 separate companies that were very much connected, commonly owned. We were going to a lot of the same meetings or weighing in on a lot of the same things, but I had my own team, he had his own team. We never have reported to each other, and that's served us really well. In fact, I still wouldn't want to work for Dan. Dan wouldn't want to work for me either. Like, so, I mean, we've never had to, we've been fortunate. You wouldn't want to work for me.
I think it'd be great.
But so we've been fortunate that we've had kind of 2 separate sandboxes to play in, but they serve each other, and we can kind of lean on each other for different things. But I will also say, sometimes like what Thrasher needs that might be like not good for Supportworks or vice versa has created friction where it's like, he definitely historically, and this has gotten so much better in even the last 5 years, where now we look at this as like the family holdings, they all serve each other. And like as ownership has actually transitioned and stuff, I think we think more like owners than employees. But when I'm CEO of one company and he's CEO of another, like I was tribal to my team and our things, and he was as well. And we would butt heads. And again, my mom being the kind of matriarch of the family health has forced us to go. We've seen 2 different therapists together to figure out how to communicate better and to be more empathetic to each other and different things. So it's been a combination of some good luck with having 2 different companies, but we've still had to work on it and be humble enough to say like, yeah, let's go stink and sit with a therapist, which is not, that's terribly
Our mom
fun.
would maybe make us do that because she would always say the family comes first.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is very, I mean.
She was like, I'll get rid of all of
you
it.
guys, yeah.
Like,
You mess up my grandkids,
she
we're
was just
done.
like, the family is going to function well, and if that means we have to get rid of the business in order for that to be the case, then so be it.
Wow.
I mean, she would say that
I
out
love,
loud.
I love that. That's awesome. She's very clear about what's important to her. And I think what's really interesting, and you guys will pick up on this in the presentations, Dave is doing exactly what he should be doing in running the business that really matches his personality, his skill set, and Dan is doing the exact same thing. His strengths play so well in the business that he's run. So it's really cool to hear him, have this wonderful partnership. There is tension in the partnership from time to time, and I think you've described it. There's also incredible synergies. Dan's team discovers some new way of doing something, and Dave seems like that's fantastic. We're taking it to the rest of the dealer network. And you're very generous about that. Like if you learn a best practice, you're happy to have other people adopt those best practices.
Well, and it goes the other way too, where they're training people and somebody says, we've been trying this and it works, and then they come back and they're like, hey, this is working in this other town, you guys should try it. And then we would try it. Like over the years, there was a lot of overlap on learnings that went back and forth. Or they'll invent a better product, or
we might come up with some new sales technique that we think is a good idea, but we'd like them to test it for us, and we'll have them test it. And if most of them turn out halfway decent or get tweaked, and then some of them crash and burn, and so, but they're kind of a testing lab for the training and development and technology teams and different support functions that we have at Supportworks that will kind of let them be guinea pigs, and because we have a vested interest in each other's success, they're like, that kind of stinks to have to test that for you, but we know that if it works, it'll come back to us, so.
Awesome. So we're a little bit over time. I want to ask one last question. That is just, as you guys both look forward, do you see just the continued growth of the company? Is private equity now kind of taking away your future, or you guys are at a point where like, nope, we've got a bright future. I think we got something really significant here in front of us.
I think we're super excited about the future. I think that private equity, while it was scary, especially early on, it's actually been a huge gift, because we wouldn't be operating in 20-some cities right now if they wouldn't have created that opportunity for us. We would be in Omaha only because we had a dealer in every other city. And we would have been fine with that, by the way. So we weren't looking for that opportunity. But once that happened, and the company in Kansas City sells, now we get to go to Kansas City and have a presence there. And we were able to buy the company in Des Moines, and those are 2 hours, 3 hours away from here. So, and then throughout the country. So like honestly, it's turned out to be this. They've done well, and I'm sure that their investors are happy. But we've been blessed and gotten to do more than we ever thought was possible, and now we get to have a way bigger vision than we would have had without that. So I'm pretty excited.
Kind of feels uncapped. I don't see anything.
We could not buy another company and just take the companies that we have that we've acquired that are small for the market share that they have, and double in size easy without buying another company. I think we'll still buy more companies, and we'll keep expanding geographically, but we could just. There's a lot of meat on the bone with what we already have that we can continue to grow. And I think a lot of what we're now trying to focus on is, because the acquisitions are more like the phase of crazy amounts of, like the people that wanted to sell probably already did. Clint Cooper's here. He's a dealer of ours. If he wanted to sell, he's had 7 years to think about it. They would have either sold to us or sold to them, or they're like, I like owning a business and I don't want to sell it, at least for a while. And so, it's settled things down a little bit to where we're not like, I'm not having to like look at deals, 6 deals a year. I'm looking at like 1 or 2. So it's a little bit more paced. And I think what we're focused on now is internal synergies. How can we integrate these companies better? How can we, improve kind of the conversions that we have in our call center. How can we convert our in sales a little bit better? And so we're really working more on internal things than focusing on like just capturing market share, which was really done out of, if we aren't offensive, we're going to get crushed. But
yeah, right. And in closing, what I love about this is, very high service orientation towards our customers, great products, great quality. You guys care deeply about your employees. So as they grow, hopefully more customers are having great experiences, more employees are having great experiences. They're bringing forth their values. It's a very values-oriented company. It's just a great Evergreen story. So thank you guys so much. Enjoyed the conversation this morning.
thanks.
And look forward to the rest of it.